our 20th anniversary year. Thank you, Christine. And since 2001, our primary goal has been to educate ASU students and the greater community about local and global justice issues, while promoting diversity, freedom of speech, and academic freedom of discussion. We believe it is vital to connect local diversity, sustainability, and social issues to global struggles. We also want to acknowledge the violent loss of 8 lives on Tuesday, and to reiterate our respect and support the Asian American, Pacific Islander, and other Asian communities. We mourn, but also stand in solidarity with the AAPI community and condemn the use of anti-Asian rhetoric that has spurred the astronomical rise in violence against AAPI communities and individuals across the US. Local to Global Justice will continue striving to build bridges of compassionate understanding and respect across cultures and communities, and to fight white supremacy in all of its destructive forms. Now, having said that, to that end, our major event is to host a 3-day annual community forum and festival. Obviously this year we could not hold it, but we are holding a series of 3 community forums to bring in panelists, activists from around the state to help us understand how to forge more of these connections in a more effective manner. So our topic today, this is the second in our series. Our topic today is injustice in the borderlands with a focus on immigration. And Daniel Furnish will introduce our panelists. But the major questions we're trying to tackle with this particular set of forums is how have communities endured the last 4 years of disinvestment, attacks on civil liberties, and violent response to peaceful protests that call out the structural racism, misogyny, xenophobia, and other issues that contribute to systemic violence for our local communities. We want to recognize and support the resiliency and vibrancy of community action as a means of challenging neoliberal individualization. So for today, I just want to give you a quick overview of how this is going to run. We have 3 amazing panelists and a discussant. What we are going to do is listen to our panelists first, and then have a musical interlude from Walt Richardson, and then have a group question and answer period. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and we will, oh, Walt just joined us, great. So we will return to that chat box and keep track of all of those questions and comments for the Q&A period. So at any time, if you have anything that you want to say, go ahead and stick it in the chat box. I also want to let people know about some future events that Local to Global Justice is co-sponsoring and hosting. On Wednesday, March 31st at 5 p.m., we will be co-sponsoring an event called The Future of Resistance. And on April 1st, Thursday, the next day, we will be also hosting an event called Decarcerating Disability. And both of those events and their links will be in the chat, as well as on our website on Monday. And I also want to let you know to hold the date for April 22nd, Thursday, April 22nd. It is Earth Day that day, and also the final installment of our community forum. So we'll be holding our final community forum that night from 5 to 6:30 p.m. Called In Honor of the Earth, with a variety of panelists from local environmental and sustainability justice activism. Also be on the lookout for a larger commemoration event of our 20-year existence in September, featuring lots of speakers from all over the world who have been part of Local to Global and have been instrumental in forging this amazing community of scholars and activists that you see today. So with that, I will turn it over to Daniel, who will introduce our panelists for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Good morning, everybody. My name is Daniel Furnish. I am a master's student in the Justice Studies program here at ASU. This is my 2nd year with Local to Global Justice, and I am very excited to bring you some wonderful discussants and panel speakers today, as well as some great entertainment. I'm really looking forward to this event. My focus of study centers on immigration studies, and I've been waiting for this panel for a long time. I will give you a brief overview of just who we have, and then I'm going to give you a deeper description of each panelist or discussant as they come up. So who we have today for our speakers will be Amani Grace Lewis Noel from No Mas Muertes, Zaira Emiliana Olivier from, she's the Executive Director of the People's Defense Initiative out of Tucson. We have Sarah Erie with Lutheran Social Services of the Southwest Refugee Services in Phoenix. We have attorney Ray A. Guevara Maldonado from Guevara Maldonado Law Group, excuse me. He will be our discussant today. So just speaking briefly About immigration, obviously, this has been a hot button ticket and issue in the US for many, many years, especially the last several terms of presidency. It's a continuing issue, as you all know, as policy and practice fails to meet the needs of migrants of all types. I'm not going to get too into that because I really want you to have time with our panel discussions. But again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll get started. So we're going to start with Imani Grace Lewis Norrell. As I said, she's from No Mas Muertes in Tucson. Imani grew up in the Midwest and is a graduate of Earlham College, where they earned their BA in Peace and Global Studies. In pursuing their degree, Imani spent time in Northern Ireland, where they studied the historical context and socio-political dynamics of the Troubles and Rwanda, and where they were challenged to re-examine the perception of peace and reconciliation. Imani was a 2017 recipient of the Thomas Watson Fellowship. During that time, they continued to be challenged to transform their understanding of peace and justice as they explored how communities survive and create in the face of structural and historical violence. Imani became involved in the Desert Aid Program, No More Deaths, No Mas Muertes, in 2018, and has lived in Southern Arizona for the past 2.5 years, continuing to collaborate with No Mas Muertes throughout this time. As part of their involvement with the organization, Imani has worked to support the growth of programming and resources for BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and/or people of color volunteers in No More Deaths Desert Aid Program, and is excited to be a part of the second and third BIPOC-only month-long happenings in March and April 2021. They currently live in Tucson, working as a preschool teacher and at eMERGE Center Against Domestic Abuse. And they continue to learn daily from the people and community in their life. So without further ado, Imani, thanks for joining us, and the stage is yours.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction, Daniel, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you all today. I'm here today to talk to you all a little bit about No More Deaths, No Mas Muertes. And like Daniel said, I've been involved with this organization for the past 2.5 years, primarily through the Desert Aid Program. No More Deaths is an organization that works in solidarity with people migrating across the US-Mexico border. And just to begin, I'd like to acknowledge that all of our work does take place on Indigenous land. And particularly the corridors that we work in takes place on Tohono O'odham land. And the border, the US-Mexico border, when it was created, did divide the ancestral Tohono O'odham land. And so I want to acknowledge the violence that was inherent to the creation of the border, and just to acknowledge that for centuries prior to the creation of the border, people have been moving back and forth across this corridor of land. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So here's our mission statement, which you can see here. Our mission is to end death and suffering along the Mexico-US border through civil initiative, which is people of conscience working openly and in community to uphold fundamental human rights. And our organization originally grew out of a lot of the sanctuary movement and the idea of civil initiative that grew in response to the crisis with El Salvador. I have the next one. Thank you. Okay. So this is just to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the different aspects of our organization, because we do have different working groups that work on different but related projects having to do with migration in the Tucson and Southern Arizona area. So we exist as a volunteer-led, non-hierarchical, consensus-based organization, which means that all of our working groups come to decisions about the work that they do, and then we connect in our central hub, which is the Spokes Council, to share decisions with each other and to stay connected to the work that all the different working groups are doing. And you can see here some of the different working groups that we have. The Desert Aid Working Group, which is where I'm primarily involved, includes water drops, which I'll talk about later, and our humanitarian aid camp, as well as search and rescue team, a project in northern Mexico where people bring supplies down to folks staying in shelters on the other side of the border. And then we have abuse documentation, which has been releasing reports for the past several years, documenting abuse by law enforcement and Border Patrol. We have Keep Tucson Together, which provides limited legal support to people experiencing detention. And we have No Gaulless Project, which works to support people who've been deported. So all of these different but connected areas of the work. And these working groups kind of operate independently to some degree. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So this is a map here of recovered human remains in Arizona over the past 15 years. To date, over 7,000 known human remains have been recovered. And it's important to note that the number of people who have died and whose remains have been found is far outweighed by the number of people who have died and whose remains haven't been found. And some estimates put the number of people who have died crossing the Sonoran Desert at 3 times the number of known deaths. And how far people have to walk to safely arrive in the US depends on where they're crossing. In order to be able to move freely, they have to get north of the northernmost checkpoint, which in some areas can be as far as 80 miles north of the border, ensuring a journey of at least 2 weeks if one is in good health and doesn't get lost. And so it's physically impossible to carry with you the amount of water you would need for such a trip. And what we've also seen is that with increased militarization over the past 15, 20 years, more and more people are getting pushed into more remote desert and away from crossing close to cities and populated areas. And the result of that is that people are having to travel farther and farther stretches without water in hotter desert and farther away from where people live and could potentially receive help if somebody were to become lost or were to need emergency help. Can I have the next one, please? Okay, so like I said, we have a lot of different segments of our organization. The one that I'm most involved with is Desert Aid. And so you can see up here, the uppermost photo is an image of somebody participating in water drops, which is where we go out in trucks and use mapping and GPS software to hike migrant trails and leave supplies, beans, gallons of water, blankets, socks in strategic areas. We also want to be a presence in the desert in case we run into people. Many of our volunteers are EMTs and wilderness first responders. And we've seen use of the supplies we leave out there over the years. And we do this both in the Aravaca corridor and also over farther in the West Desert by Ajo. And then the other image that we have down there is of our humanitarian aid station, which is called Bird Camp. Bird Camp is an aid station outside of Aravaca, Arizona, where we offer food, water, rest, respite, and medical care to folks who are crossing the desert. And volunteers who stay out there help cook food, work on projects, clean, maintain the off-grid infrastructure, do dishes, and work as a team with the other volunteers out there to offer a safe and solid humanitarian aid space for guests. And we follow, we are in relationship with the Red Cross protocols for humanitarian aid, and our Desert Aid station is entirely volunteer run. And we try to operate it 24/7. And the next one, please. Okay, so this is just to give you a brief timeline of some of the increased criminalization we've seen, specifically of humanitarian aid or our humanitarian aid work over the past few years. I do want to note that this is by no means, this is specific to what we're seeing in relationship to our humanitarian aid work, but the criminalization and violence against people crossing the desert and the criminalization of migration obviously has a deep and long history. And many of the types of increased violence that we're seeing through our work is violence that takes place on a daily basis out in the desert where we don't have visibility to it, but we know it's happening. But we can see here that in June 2017 is the first time that Border Patrol raids our camp. And in Arivaca, Arizona, in January 2018, 9 volunteers are charged with federal misdemeanors for leaving water on Cabeza Prieta in the West Desert. In January 2018 is when Border Patrol raids the barn in Ajo, arresting Scott Warren and 2 people receiving aid. And then July 2020 and October 2020, Border Patrol raids Bird Camp again, detaining volunteers and arresting people receiving aid. So we've definitely seen consistent growth in criminalization of this work. Thank you. So here we can see an image of Border Patrol pouring out water from one of our water drops. And this is actually a still taken from a video that was released right before the arrest of Scott Warren was made, documenting Border Patrol vandalizing these water drops. And there's been a lot of careful and well-researched information about the abuse and vandalization of water drops and other humanitarian aid supplies. And you can see that all at our website. If you look under the abuse documentation section, there's a report called The Disappeared that has 3 installments, and the most recent one, Left to Die, just came out. And it is a really well-researched and extensive exploration of various forms of abuse that that take place out in the desert, perpetuated by Border Patrol and law enforcement. And then I think in terms of how people can support and get involved with our work, that's just a brief overview. Obviously, there's a lot more information. And when it's not COVID times, we monthly have kind of information sessions that people can come to learn more in depth about the context of this work. But I don't think that's happening right now with the COVID. But other ways to support and get involved, we do have volunteer programs for people who are interested in doing desert aid work. We have 2 month-long programs, one desert aid month-long that is supporting our humanitarian aid camp and doing water drops, and one that is specifically happening this summer, that is supporting the search and rescue team. And we also have an application on our website for people who are local to the area who are trying to get involved but maybe don't have a month to commit, but who are interested in getting trained to be able to support the work in a more ongoing way. And all of that information is on our website. We also accept donations, monetary donations, and there's oftentimes need for items to stock our humanitarian aid camp. And that information can also be found on our website. We're often in need of things like clothes, socks, shoes, commonly used items like that. And then the third way that I would say is to share information. I think that a lot of people don't have visibility to the egregious violence that's perpetuated in the borderlands and the extent of what people are facing when they have to cross, and the extent of death and disappearance along the border. And so definitely using the resources available to learn more about this and to share this information to build our collective understanding of this crisis is another great way to support the work. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Amani, for joining us today and giving us this information, giving us an overview of the great work that you do in general and specifically through No Mas Muertes. This issue is huge, especially as we in the news see these last couple of weeks, the rise of unaccompanied minors showing up at the border, Trump's horrible policy that is a part of a larger system that we are probably going to see continue through the Biden administration again as he discontinues the wall, but continues to turn mechanisms to try and stop immigrants from coming across the border. Also not lifting Title 42. So yeah, great work, very much needed. Thank you for sharing some ways for us to get engaged with that. If anybody has questions for Amani, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will get to the question and answer session after all our panelists have discussed. So with that said, we're going to move right on into our next discussant. This is Zaira Melian Olivier. She's the Executive Director of the People's Defense Initiative in Tucson. Zaira is a Mexican-born human rights activist, writer, storyteller, and abolitionist. Currently, Zaira serves as Executive Director of the People's Defense Initiative, which is a grassroots anti-capitalist organization that she co-founded in 2018 as a community defense front against repressive policies and structures. In line with their Sanctuary for All mission, the PDI Collective has led campaigns and programs such as the Tucson Sanctuary Initiative, Feeding Those Who Feed Us, and the Tucson Tenants Union. Previously, Zaira has organized with Lupe Tucson and Jobs with Justice along the intersection of migrant rights and labor. Zaira, thank you so much for joining us for today, and the stage is yours.
Thank you for that intro, Daniel, and hi everyone. Saida, as you heard, I'll expand a little bit more about a little bit of what Daniel touched on, and I'm sorry if it's a little noisy back here. I have my little boy in the room trying to stay quiet for us. So a little bit about myself. As mentioned, I'm from Mexico. I'm a migrant. My mother brought my brother and I here when we were small children. We settled in the south side of Tucson as an undocumented family. So I have a lot of really deep ties to the topics that we're discussing today. We founded PDI in 2018 after years of organizing on the ground for issues such as sanctuary city policies and the like. Tucson's a very specific place, as some of you may know, and as was already mentioned, Tucson is 60 miles from the border, which means that we're occupied by Border Patrol. They've got free reign. We've got collaboration between our police department, our sheriff's department, and ICE and Border Patrol. It's heavily militarized, so now we're pretty much surrounded, and border communities are surrounded by checkpoints. So if you're undocumented, say, settled in the south side of Tucson, you're very much stuck. You're surrounded by checkpoints. And this, of course, as we were learning, doesn't happen in a vacuum. So we've had, a rash of really repressive policies here that have been passed in the last 20 years in Arizona, which Tucson is no stranger to. We're very much often looked at as this very deep blue city in this deep red state. But in reality, Tucson is a lot like the rest of Arizona. We've got huge structural issues, in particular prevailing poverty. There's a study in 2018 that found that 58% of the zip codes in Tucson were under high distress, while only 8% were actually thriving. And those 8% were very white, and they were very far away north from the rest of us 58%, where those zip codes were heavy minority, especially Black and Latinx community members. So with that poverty comes criminalization. So we had our county attorney who finally just stepped aside after 24 years. I believe she was a county attorney, a Democrat. Under her under her watch, we had mass incarceration of women, in particular low-income women of color who had themselves been, majority of them, victims of domestic violence or some other kind of abuse. So mass criminalization here in Tucson. And of course, the criminalization part that then ties into the immigration aspect of it. So when we started PDI, People's Defense Initiative, we really wanted to ask ourselves, what kind of hole could we fill in a town like this? And the analysis that we did is that we could fill the hole of bringing this amazing grassroots energy that we have here in Tucson that's very much centered on direct services, on aiding each other, on the kind of work that No More Deaths does, and taking it into the policy end. So how could we get all of these demands and then start pushing actual policy? So that's where that's where we've been working. Just a little overview, our core values, some of them: respecting Indigenous sovereignty, solidarity is key to everything that we do, racial and socioeconomic justice, radical inclusivity is something that we like to always ask ourselves the question of, are we meeting our community where they're at? How do we make sure that we have people in leadership that are directly affected, because that is the absolute way to actually get anything done as far as policy or campaigning is concerned. Women's liberation and of course sustainability, among others. So as was mentioned earlier, a little bit of the history that we've worked on. We were core to the movement against Stone Garden, which some of you may know is the grant that police stations and sheriff stations would get from the government to directly collaborate with Border Patrol and ICE. So police officers and sheriffs, deputies who were under the clock of Stone Garden grant money were actually patrolling the borderlands. So as was mentioned earlier, making it even worse, making the areas that much worse and spreading, making traveling migrants having to go into very remote areas, very dangerous territory. So we mounted with a coalition of community partners a campaign to have our county turn down the Stone Garden money. And it took us years to get that done, but we actually just had our 1-year anniversary of finally getting them to say no. So Pima County was the first, I believe, in the entire nation to turn down Stone Garden money. Out of that fight, we also came out with the very first, believe it or not, racial profiling policy in Pima County. Pima County Sheriff's Department did not have such a thing. So we had the community there to help write that. We did have a committee that was in charge, but that dissipated quickly after this, as these things do. Just last year too, Tucson police actually came out and also rejected Stone Garden money, which is a huge win. As a previously undocumented person, and anybody who actually knows these things, we understand that the undocumented community has one of our very basic rules. The one thing that I was taught when I was a child is you never speak to the police under any circumstances. So these policies and us turning down Stone Garden and sanctuary city policies are so incredibly important for the health of our community, for the wellness of our families, and for families like mine to be able to just live a normal life. We also we led in the recent ordinance 11746, which some of you may have heard about. It was that kind of recording the police bill that was passed here in Tucson, which wasn't necessarily recording of the police, a ban on that, but really a ban on, it was giving the police the authority to tell you that you could not be in a certain place and therefore that you may not be able to record. That was actually passed, voted in by everybody in city council. And eventually, some months later, after a big fight, we were able to get it rescinded with only one vote against. Last year, we also have been mounted a campaign against an ordinance that's still in place now that criminalizes feeding our homeless community members here in Tucson in places like parks, which is just one small aspect of the larger picture of Tucson, the gentrification that's happening, the displacement that's happening of people, and then the criminalization of, you know, people being in public spaces. So we've been fighting on that end with community partners like Food Not Bombs and the like. Out of that fight too, in 2020, we developed, when the pandemic hit, we developed a program with community partners, including La Cocina, which is a great restaurant here in Tucson, a program called Feeding Those Who Feed Us. So as everybody began to lose their jobs, and all of our friends and family members who worked at restaurants, who bartended, who were cooks, you know, we saw people just lose their jobs. And through Feeding Those Who Feed Us, at the height of that program, PDI, along with community partners and restaurants in town, we were at the height of this we were cooking free meals for pickup for anybody who had lost their job or anybody who needed it. And also providing refugee families with fresh produce every day, doing direct mutual aid to undocumented families in particular, whether that was just with food or rent or whatever it is that they needed at the time. We fed thousands of families. I'm sorry, give me one sec.
Hi, everyone. Let's just be patient until Zara can come back and join us. Those of us with kids in the house, you know how hard this can be to manage.
Sorry about that.
There you go. No worries, no worries. We all know what you're going through.
Thank you. So Feeding Those Who Feed Us was an amazing program. One that we didn't plan for. It just kind of happened. And I think that program was so representative of the kind of community that we have in Tucson, where we had businesses who were out of business for a while. We had, you know, service industry workers who were cooking for us, really providing hundreds, thousands of meals every single week at some point in time to community members everywhere. And of course, as was mentioned earlier, we did run the Sanctuary City campaign of 2019, which was the very first initiative of its kind. It was the very first people-led sanctuary initiative, meaning we collected we wrote it, we collected the signatures, and we put it on the ballot. We were unfortunately very unsuccessful with that campaign, but a lot of really amazing things came out of that. We really ran a campaign that was true to what we believed in. So when we were asked the question of, is what you're trying to do with this campaign protect undocumented people? And that's exactly what we said we wanted to do. We wanted to have a city where arrests were down, where victims of domestic violence and sexual assault could come forward and feel safe, where we weren't having police pull over people for pretextual stops like window tinting. So we did write a lot into this initiative. It was a very heavy initiative for sure. I think calling it Sanctuary sold it short a little bit, because we tried to get at a lot of the issues as far as criminalization is concerned here in Tucson, and tried our very best to circumvent what's left of SB 1070. So we wrote that initiative in a way where we got as creative and as close as we possibly could to that what was left of SB 1070. The larger goal was, yes, to win, but also to go to court. We were pretty confident that if we were to go to court and say the Supreme Court of Arizona had two choices in front of them, and we had this bill, Prop 205, which is constitutionally protected in Arizona, and then we had this awful, terrible SB 1070 bill. We were hoping we'd get the rest of what's left of SB 1070 kicked out. Out of that, a lot of good has come out of it. We're pretty sure that the reason why TPD and the city council turned down Stone Garden was because of the fact that Prop 205 did change the conversation. It absolutely changed the conversation around policing and immigration here. And it's quite an interesting study too about, you know, the forces that really came out for or against this, the forces who were pro-sanctuary, the forces who were anti-sanctuary. And then also what we were seeing from the federal administration and that kind of heavily racist and xenophobic conversation and rhetoric that we saw there be washed down into the local progressive nuance and conversation here, and how they were saying the same exact thing and just using slightly different words to describe it. It's really interesting. So recently, out of 2020, at the beginning of 2020, we were having conversations around housing. Pima County, we've had a housing issue for a very long time. It's been, we were having thousands of families being evicted without representation here in Pima County for years now. So we started asking ourselves the question about building tenant power at the beginning of 2020. Then the pandemic hit, which just made that issue that much worse. And we saw so many undocumented families and mixed status families who, unlike the rest of us, weren't allowed to have any kind of assistance at all. So we were in a place where we were seeing families who were hungry, who were terrified. They wanted to pay rent so badly that they would bypass a meal to do so. It was awful, but it's what the system calls for. So out of that, we've built the Tucson Tenants Union. We're building it, building the plane as we're flying it, which is our thing here. Out of that, we actually just had one of our first and largest wins. When we started the Tucson Tenants Union, one of our last goals was to provide eviction defense for everybody. Some of you may or may not know that when you provide eviction defense, legal counsel for families who are going through eviction proceedings, here in Pima County, 95% of those proceedings are ruled in the favor of landlords. That's even, there are some places out there where we've got 2% of tenants actually ever winning their cases. When you give folks legal representation, those numbers are actually turned on their head. People remain in their homes. And the ripple effect of families not having to go through a traumatic displacement like that, it's hard to measure, especially in the community. And even made worse during a pandemic. I mean, eviction during a pandemic is not just inhumane, we believe it's absolutely barbaric. We've seen that evictions, after moratoriums are lifted and evictions happen, people die. People died. At least 10,000 people were found to have died because as a direct result of eviction. So here in Tucson, in the last 3 weeks, we've had this big fight. My team, we wrote a proposal with some friends in the county. And we actually just on Monday were able to, we were the first in the nation to pass a proposal voted in by every single board of supervisor in Pima County, except for one, which will basically build an office of eviction defense. At the moment, it is temporary. We've got 2 million, which is good. It's great. Anybody who is going to be up for an eviction will be able to get representation, including undocumented people, which is huge for us. The next step now is to make sure that we get this in a permanent office and to make sure that we keep it public. But as far as we know, this is the first appropriation of emergency COVID relief money that's going to go directly towards defending people from eviction. So it's huge. We're also working with a brand new initiative, the Fight for 15 here in Tucson. We're part of the coalition that brought that. We wrote a Fight for 15 bill that's mirrored that we saw in Flagstaff, with a few little things changed. One of them, which is part of our platform too, is an office of enforcement. I worked on the 2016 campaign in Arizona that changed the minimum wage from $8 to $12 an hour this last year, and also gave every single worker in Arizona. And one of the things that we saw out of that was so much abuse, especially towards undocumented workers. So we made sure to write this in. This should be on the ballot if we collect enough signatures this year. Now, ways to get involved. There's a lot of ways to get involved for us. We're still very much taking safety precautions and aren't out there, but at this moment you could volunteer for the Fight for 15, where we're carefully collecting signatures there. You can join the Tucson Tenants Union, which can mean a variety of things. And the way that we work with PDI is if you want to get involved in any way, shape, or form, you've got any idea, you're a volunteer that wants to be in the group and start organizing with us. The group is always open. You can visit peoplesdefenseinitiative.org. You can also visit TucsonTenantsUnion.org. And if you want to find out a little bit about what the campaign for the eviction defense look like, I'm going to throw it in the chat, and that is homesforallaz.com. I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today and talking about this great work that is young but has come out strong and swinging. I think really at the core of this for me is, like you said, this idea of a community creating an intervention with this idea of radical inclusivity and creating those interventions from positions that understand these systems best. I love that that's your organizational strategy, and clearly it's working, as you've talked about some of the different projects that you've undertaken over the last couple of years. Very, very inspiring. Thank you so much. Again, if anybody has any questions again for Cider, please feel free to drop them in chat now, and we will have a Q&A toward the end of our session today. That said, we're going to keep rolling so that we can get through everybody today. Our next panelist today is Sarah Erie. Sarah Erie is the Associate Director of Refugee and Immigration Services, which is a division of the Lutheran Social Services of the Southwest Phoenix office. Sarah started working for Lutheran Social Services of the Southwest after retiring from a career in education administration. She's lived and worked in China, the United Arab Emirates, and the Navajo Nation. She's dedicated to developing sustainable, high-quality support programs that engage community partners to assist with long-term refugee integration. Sarah has over 25 years of experience in all aspects of education administration, including English language learning, early childhood, reading intervention, education technology, and intervention with at-risk populations. Her areas of expertise and responsibility include refugee resettlement daily operations, asylum seeker services, refugee and asylum seeker support services program development, women's empowerment, children's services, training and interpretation, housing, co-sponsorship, and volunteer management. I had the wonderful opportunity personally to work with Sarah as a volunteer for Lutheran Social Services, helping her family resettle here in the Valley, and she's wonderful. So Sarah, please take it away.
Everyone, thank you for the invitation to be here. And Daniel, it's so wonderful to see you again. And I appreciate being asked to speak in this forum about the immigration issues that we've been facing. And I just to give you a little background, Lutheran Social Services of the Southwest was first brought into this space in 2018 with the family reunification effort. If you'll remember that horrible policy that separated children from their parents, and then there was a court decision that made the reunification mandatory by the end of July of 2018. And we were asked to provide support for that effort. And so ICE had, the parents were incarcerated in Eloy, the children were incarcerated all over the United States. And so ICE was beginning to fly the children home or back to Phoenix and bringing up their parents from Eloy and reuniting them. And then we actually offered to bring them to our offices where we would provide services to them to make sure that trauma services, counseling, and then we safely saw them home to their families in the United States. That was an effort that changed my life personally, and also I would say it really got the attention of our agency. One of our core values is to stabilize families who are in crisis. And so it became very clear that these are families in crisis. And we have a 50-year history as a nonprofit in the state of Arizona, and we have a very long reach into the community in terms of resources. And so we began to mobilize those resources on this effort. And I would say one of the unique things about our organization is that we actually have long arms and voices that reach into the communities of people who are supporting this kind of approach with the administration. Our donor base spans from very conservative people to very liberal people. Lutherans are on all spectrum. And so one of the things that we decided to do, which I was really the main, I would say, instigator of this, is to go into those communities and try to give them some information that would help them to not support these policies and to understand really what is happening with migration. And so we led an effort to coordinate the church community to shelter migrants that were being transitioned through Phoenix. In the next year, in 2018 and 2019, the catch and release program, which I don't like that term, but for lack of a better term, that's what the government did, where they would apprehend families and then they would release them to go to their families that were living in America. We had more than 48,000 people travel through the city of Phoenix between October of 2018 and July of 2019. And we coordinated about 45 different church communities to shelter the people and to provide them the necessary means for travel, and then also to help get them connected to services where they were, where their destinations were, including legal support. So that's where I became involved in this situation. Things were tied up pretty tight by August of 2019, and the Trump administration effectively created a policy wall. They didn't really need a physical border wall. They created a regulatory wall that essentially stopped migration. And some of these things are pretty well known, the migrant protection protocols and so forth, but there are other things that I think are under the surface that haven't been widely reported that are really astonishing in their cruelty. I wish I could say that I'm surprised, but the fact is that our culture has done this before, has done this often, continues to do this. White supremacy uses government to suppress Indigenous people. They always have. I am personally outraged to see it happen in my generation, but this is nothing new. And so I want to talk a little bit about what's happening now, but I really want to talk about this system of suppression that's happening all throughout the border region, through Mexico and into Central America. Before I get to that, currently we are seeing a rise in people who are coming to the border, but it's only a rise by comparison. So I think what people need to understand is this is a government created crisis. It's really not a crisis. The government policies have created a situation, and the media around it creates a certain kind of fervency, but it isn't a crisis. The people that are being released now are primarily people that are not Mexican or Central American. They're being held under the Title 42, which is a COVID-related restriction from travel. So most of the people that are being released in Phoenix today are Brazilian and Cuban, and they are coming in families. And now we're up to about 100 people a day being released in Phoenix. Again, when they're being held in the border, they're being held in conditions that are terrible. So just this past week on Monday, we had a family from Brazil who shared that they were held for 3 days in a concrete cell. The mother, father, and 4 children, all under the age of 12, were held in a concrete cell, slept on a concrete floor for 3 days with a foil blanket. The temperature is about 65 degrees. The children, when they come out of being held in border facilities, they have respiratory issues from being in the cold and on the concrete. They're fed from vending machines. Sometimes the food that they have is half frozen, not even heated. So they come having been under so much duress, and then the experience inside the Border Patrol, it just exacerbates that. So this is what I think one of the things is just a continuous resistance to the way people are being treated. I think we need to also make sure that we hold people accountable. This is the Biden administration who's doing this. I think it's important for us to recognize that the system of containment that has been established, it started with the Bush administration. It was escalated under the Obama administration, and it was criminalized and brought to the most horrible extent under the Trump administration. But make no mistake about it, both Democrats and Republicans are equally responsible for this atrocious treatment of migrants. And as the previous speakers have talked about, the criminalization of migrants is the issue. And it isn't only now the way that people are being treated at the border, but what happened under the Trump administration that accelerated what the Obama administration had done was they set up what they call regional processing centers. These regional processing centers, let me pause for a minute. Isn't it interesting how the white supremacy uses government, and they love to twist language into things that sound maybe less atrocious than they are. But the regional processing centers that they have erected are really nothing more than internment camps. And we now have the capacity to intern 4 times the people that we interned during the Japanese internment. We are separating children from their parents just like we did to indigenous people in our own country and forced them into a system of education that denied their culture and denied their history. This is no different. We've been doing it, and now we're continuing to do it. And the Biden administration is continuing to do it. They've said recently in the latest media that they're going to use these regional processing centers to quickly evaluate families' right to migrate. Now, these processing centers, they built 4 processing centers. One of them is in Arizona, in Yuma. It's a tent structure, and it is going to be used to house families. I think that we in Arizona, that can be something we can focus on, and we can demand that not happen in our state. But not only is that happening on the border, the Trump administration has financed and built regional processing centers all along migrant routes in Mexico and all along migrant routes in Central America. They have given financing to those governments through their cooperative agreements, not only to stop migrants, but to round them up and to put them in internment camps. This isn't being widely reported. But this, to me, is the absolute crisis. The crisis is not migration. The crisis is our government's response to it. The crisis is this continued institutionalization and criminalization of people for no reason. And so I think that whatever can be done needs to be done. I think we need to make sure that we are not attributing a better policy because it has a gentler tone. The government is the problem. Without a doubt, the government is the problem. So right now, in Phoenix, in my backyard, are people who are being released, thankfully. And so we can offer them humanitarian aid, and we do that. The Welcome Center is a community shelter that was established at the end of 2018. It's in downtown Phoenix, where many of the migrants are being released. It's not got enough capacity for everyone. So we are beginning another round of recruitment of churches in the area who will provide assistance, who will provide meals and travel assistance and comfort, pastoral care, legal counseling, destination services to make sure they stay connected to people who care in the places where they're going. This is all going on right now. And that's a wonderful way to be involved locally. The other thing that is really, really important is the education effort into our communities of faith, people who claim that they're not racists, people who claim that they love children, people who claim that they support life. We need to, and we do, and I do, go into those communities and talk white hair to white hair about what's really happening here. And do you really support that? And how can you continue to support that? And really challenge those communities in their belief systems. I find that, I think that personally is one of the most important things that I do. We're responsible. I feel responsible for my community and the response that they have been led to have, and the result of all of the propaganda they've been fed. And so I take that very personally. And so I spend a lot of my effort informing communities and challenging their belief systems. So I think that for me, that's all I have to say. I'm so fascinated by this event. And I really enjoyed both Zaira and Imani's presentations. I appreciate so much the work that you do and will continue to do. So I say I'm open to questions and really listening to what everyone has to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. As I knew you would, you speak so eloquently and passionately about these issues, and from a place that's very well informed. The work you do both through LSS and just in general in your personal life is really inspiring, and I really appreciate the effort today that you brought to this to tie these issues into deeper systemic issues such as white supremacy and the history of anti-immigrant policy and practice in the US, and how that is a bipartisan issue. Thank you so much. It's wonderful. All three of the panelists today have been wonderful, attacking this from several different angles, all based in the community, and all carrying that fight upward.
Now I have the very happy task of introducing a local activist attorney. Many of us identify as scholar activists. I'm thinking he is an activist attorney for social justice in immigrant communities and well beyond, Ray Ibarra-Maldonado. As you saw on our website, he is an alum of ASU, also of Stanford Law School. He comes from Douglas, Arizona. And if you've never had a chance to read his memoir, his biography, look it up. It's an excellent read. He and his partner in all things, Angeles Maldonado, are well known to activists across the region. And so I think I'll just stop there. I mean, they're part of the one of the fastest growing law firms in the country for a very good reason. So welcome and thank you for any kind of closing framing remarks after our powerful panel. Ray, thank you. Mil gracias.
Yeah, no, Beth, thank you. And I'm ready to get my love wings on and start flying. That was just an amazing musical performance that went such perfectly, Walter, just beautiful, goes with everything that we heard before that, right? Just such amazing, inspiring work. And then we're motivated by art to keep it going. And I'm just super pumped up right now. Like I've been involved for a long time. Probably my first local to global, Beth, was 2001 or 2002 when we presented as students when I was an ASU undergrad. Have been involved with local and global multiple times since then. It's always a pleasure to come back and amazing to see local and global getting creative, figuring out ways to keep us together as a community, even during this pandemic. And just going through what we heard from Imani, Zaira, and Sarah is just brought me back kind of to my foundation as an activist, organizer prior to becoming an attorney. You know, that work in No More Deaths, ladies and gentlemen, that is my absolute favorite organization on the US-Mexico border. They've been committed to one thing and they've been consistent with it ever since. Stopping the deaths of people who are coming across for a better life for themselves and their children. Because of white supremacy, as Sarah pointed out, we kill brown people, working class people, every single year and have been doing so for decades along the US-Mexico border. What I think we'll be seeing is one of the grossest human rights tragedies in the history of our country someday is happening in our backyard and probably happening right now. And No More Deaths steps up every single day and fights back against that. So I encourage you to get involved with Imani and her work. Even if you're in Phoenix, there's a Phoenix chapter, which our office volunteers as a pro bono legal counsel for, and provides the training for people before they go out in the desert there. I encourage you to get involved with them. And then we heard about the great work People's Defense Initiative is doing in Tucson, Operation Stone Garden, right? Getting rid of that. I remember as a public defender in Cochise County, getting the discovery and reading through and saying, what's this Operation Stone Garden that these officers are putting our brown brothers and sisters in prison for? So getting rid of that is a prime example that we can look for things in our community that are on a national level, but we can work on them and come together and say, we want to make this change to save lives and help keep families together that they might not even know our work benefited from, but it's so inspiring to the People's Defense Initiative, the work that they're doing, the work they're continuing to do. It's very motivational. And you know, I in our office will be involved in any way, as well as Sarah with your work, whatever we can do in terms of, you know, educating folks on this is what's going to happen with your ICE check-in. This is your court hearing. You know, we're happy to volunteer for that. So again, just a beautiful, beautiful afternoon. I want to leave plenty of time for people for their questions and comments, but just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I feel absolutely inspired and blessed to be able to share the little bit of time we have with you folks. And we got to keep it moving forward because as we saw what happened in the House a couple of days ago, we got the DREAM Act, we got the Farm Worker Bill passed. Now it's going to the Senate. And what are they going to say in the Senate? Border crisis, you know, but we have to do the work that Sarah was talking about, change the narrative and say, no, this is a government crisis. Government's doing the wrong thing. People are simply looking for a better life for themselves and their families that they always have been. Let's get the DREAM Act passed, let's get the Farm Worker Bill passed, and let's not let any more militarization or funding for border enforcement into any of these bills.
Well, thanks to everyone. I wish we had a bit longer. We do want to honor your time, and we appreciate deeply the panelists, Ray as a discussant. We thank you, Asante Sana, and we will see you next time.